So you want to own a junkyard. A junkyard looks like chaos. Rusted cars stacked to the sky, guys with cutting torches, no visible system. But underneath that mess is one of the highest margin businesses in America. And almost nobody outside the industry understands why a dead Honda Civic is worth more in pieces than it ever was whole. By the end of this video, you'll understand where the real money in a junkyard actually comes from. Why one auto salvage company nearly went to prison over a jar of mercury switches. And why the metal you can see is the least valuable part of the entire business. Okay, let's start with what it actually costs to open one of these. You need land, a lot of it. Most yards run anywhere from a few acres up to 50 or more. That land needs to be zoned for industrial or salvage use, which already rules out most available property. And it needs environmental permits before you can legally start piling up cars and fluids on open ground. Then equipment, an excavator with a grappling claw, forklifts, a hydraulic car crusher, and specialized cutting torches. Used equipment alone can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars before you've bought a single car. Now, inventory. This is the part people get wrong. You're not just buying broken down cars from owners for a couple $100s. Most of your real inventory comes from insurance auctions, where wrecked and totaled vehicles get sold off in bulk after an accident. Then licensing and insurance. You need a dealer's license to legally buy and resell vehicles and parts, plus liability insurance for a lot full of heavy machinery and flammable fluids. Add it all up, and a real functioning junkyard easily costs several $1,000,000 to get off the ground. Land, permits, equipment, insurance, and enough starting inventory to actually have something to sell. One more thing before we move on. Who actually owns the inventory changes the whole business model. Independent junkyards, the classic model, buy wrecked cars outright and profit from reselling the parts and scrap themselves. But there are also massive salvage auction companies that never own a single car. They just run the auction and take a fee from both the insurance company and the buyer. Same industry, completely different business. Quick pause before we get into where the real money in this business actually comes from. If you're the kind of person who wants to understand what's actually going on behind an industry everyone drives past but nobody explains properly, that's this entire channel. Hit subscribe so the next one finds you. Here's the part that surprises almost everyone. Scrap metal, the thing everyone assumes is the whole business, is actually the smallest piece of the revenue. Right now, a complete junk car is worth somewhere between $100 and $750 in pure scrap steel, depending on its weight and current metal prices. But that same car, parted out instead of crushed, is worth dramatically more. The engine alone can sell for hundreds of dollars. The transmission, more. Doors, bumpers, headlights, all sold separately to repair shops and individual buyers. And hidden inside every car are two things most people never think about. First, the catalytic converter. It contains small amounts of platinum, palladium, and rhodium, and depending on the vehicle, it can be worth anywhere from $50 to $500 on its own. Second, copper wiring. A typical car contains 50 to 70 pounds of copper wiring, and copper sells for several dollars a pound. That's real money hiding inside the dashboard and the doors that most people scrapping their own car never even think to look for. This is exactly why the biggest company in this industry isn't really a junkyard chain at all. It's a parts distributor. LKQ Corporation is the largest recycled auto parts company in North America, with over 500 facilities and more than $3 billion in revenue in a single recent quarter alone. And here's the number that proves the whole point of this video. Roughly 95% of LKQ's revenue comes from selling parts and services. Only about 5% comes from scrap metal and catalytic converter materials combined. So the real business of owning a junkyard isn't scrapping cars for metal. It's running a parts warehouse that happens to store its inventory in the shape of whole automobiles. Here's the catch. Running a junkyard comes with real, ongoing liability that most people never think about until it costs them. First, environmental risk. Every car that comes onto your lot is carrying oil, coolant, brake fluid, and gasoline, and all of it can leak straight into the ground. Regulators take this seriously. One major salvage chain was fined over $160,000 by the EPA for failing to control contaminated runoff at its yards. and had to spend hundreds of thousands more removing toxic mercury switches from tens of thousands of vehicles. Because a single old mercury switch, multiplied across thousands of junked cars a year, adds up to real environmental damage. Second, theft. Catalytic converters are valuable enough and easy enough to cut out that yards themselves get targeted by thieves at night, not just the cars driving around town. That means real security costs, fencing, lighting, cameras, sometimes guard dogs, all just to protect inventory that's already sitting in your own lot. Third, this is a genuinely labor-intensive business. Pulling parts safely off a wrecked car takes trained workers, real time, and constant attention to safety, since you're working around sharp metal, heavy machinery, and flammable fluids all day. None of these costs show up in the price of the car when you buy it. They show up every single month, whether you sold anything that day or not. Now let's talk about when this actually goes wrong, because it has, and the story's a good one. In Pennsylvania, a 20-acre auto salvage yard operated for over 20 years, piling up used car batteries on open ground on the property. Those batteries leaked lead into the soil for 2 decades. By the time regulators tested the site, the lead contamination was serious enough that the federal government placed it on the national priorities list, the official list of the most hazardous contaminated sites in the entire country. It took 12 years of monitoring and cleanup before the site was finally removed from that list. And this isn't rare. Auto salvage yards show up on that federal hazardous site list more often than almost any other type of small business in America. That's the part nobody selling you on this business mentions. You're not just running a lot full of cars. You're holding decades of environmental liability on land that doesn't stop being your responsibility just because you eventually sell the property. So where is this industry actually headed? The same place a lot of industries are headed right now. Batteries. Electric vehicles don't have an engine or a transmission to sell for parts the way a gas car does. What they have instead is a battery pack worth serious money in raw materials. A single large EV battery pack can contain around $2,000 worth of recoverable metals: nickel, cobalt, lithium, and copper. The global market for recycling these battery packs was worth around $18 billion in 2025, and it's projected to more than quadruple within the next decade. A handful of companies are already racing to dominate this. One of them, founded by a former Tesla executive, is running a massive battery recycling campus in Nevada and is already valued at around $6 billion. For junkyards and auto recyclers, this is the next version of the same business. Instead of an engine and a transmission, the most valuable part of the car sitting on your lot will be a battery pack underneath the floor. So, does owning a junkyard actually make sense? In the best case, you're sitting on steady parts sales with strong margins, plus income from catalytic converters, copper, and now EV batteries. In the worst case, a contamination lawsuit, catalytic converter theft, and regulatory fines all hit in the same year. The difference usually isn't luck. It's whether you took the parts business and the liability just as seriously from day one. A junkyard isn't really a scrap metal business. It's a parts warehouse disguised as one, sitting on an environmental clock that never stops. Get the parts business right and stay ahead of the liability, and it's one of the highest margin small businesses in America. Get it wrong, and the ground beneath your lot becomes your biggest expense. If you want to see what happens when a nuclear power plant, casino, or shopping mall gets this same math wrong, the rest of this channel is full of them. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.